Hi friends, today we're going to talk about multiplying and dividing fractions. This is an important skill. Even though you have a calculator, it's really important to be able to multiply and divide fractions by hand. So, when we multiply and divide fractions, the coolest part is we don't need a common denominator. Love that because adding and subtracting fractions can be kind of a hassle. So this is actually tends to be a little bit simpler. So, for example, if I write out the problem 1/2 times 3/4, remember the top part of the fraction is called the numerator and the bottom part of the fraction is called the denominator. When we multiply fractions, we're going to multiply it across the top. And then we're going to multiply across the bottom. That's going to give us our answer, but don't forget the ever important, see if you can reduce it. All right, so let's go back to my example here. 1/2 times 3/4, we're going to multiply across the top. 1 times 3 is 3. And then we'll multiply across the bottom. 2 times 4 is 8. Then I want to check that number. Do 3 and 8 have any common factors? Well, the only factors of 3 are 3 and 1. And 8's an even number. It can't be divisible by 3. So, no common factors. We don't have to reduce that fraction. 3/8 is our answer. All right, let's try another one. Let's say I have 5/6 times 6/7. Now on these two problems, I've written that X as a multiplication symbol. You might see it different ways. So I'm going to write down a couple different ways you might see this that mean exactly the same thing. We might see a dot in between them. That would mean multiplication. Or you could see it just crammed together with parentheses. All means the same thing. All right, let's work this problem. So 5 times 6 is going to give us 30. 6 times 7 is 42. Now we want to look at that and say, can I reduce it? So 30 is 5 times 6. We know that because we just did that multiplication. Both of those are going to have a factor of 6. So I'm going to divide those both by 6 to reduce it. And we'll end up with an answer of 5/7. 5 and 7 don't have any common factors, so that is my final answer. Now let's look back at this problem. Maybe we'll use one of my alternate ones here. Notice that from the beginning, we had a 6 on top and a 6 in the denominator. When you have the same number in the numerator and the denominator, we can cancel those. And it's often helpful to cancel them before you do the multiplication, so we're dealing with smaller numbers. If we did that, 6 divided by 6 is 1, 6 divided by 6 is 1, and then we multiply across. 5 times 1 is 5, 7 times 1 is 7, and we get the exact same answer. So it's helpful often to look for that so you deal with smaller numbers. All right, let's look at another one. So I'm going to say 9/5 times 2/3. This time I put a dot in between. That's how you'll see it most often. That 9/5, remember it's totally okay to deal with a fraction that is improper, meaning that the numerator is bigger than the denominator. Multiplication and division works just the same way. All right, one thing we could do is multiply straight across to get 18 and multiply across the bottom to get 15. Both of those are divisible by 3. So 18 divided by 3 is 6, and 15 divided by 3 is 5, which gives us our final answer of 6/5. I want to show you a second way you could have approached that, and that's 9 over 5 times 2 over 3. Noticing that 9 and 3 have a common factor of 3. I'm going to divide 9 by 3 and get 3. I'm going to divide 3 by 3 and get 1. I have a simpler problem to solve now. 3 times 2 is 6. 5 times 1 is 5. Either one of those methods works just fine, whatever you prefer, or whatever you see when you approach that problem. All right, let's divide some fractions now. So I have a little rhyme that I taught my kids when they were learning to divide fractions. I don't think I came up with it, but it's kind of silly. But we tend to remember silly things. So my rhyme is, when dividing fractions, don't ask why, flip the second and multiply. That's not very nice. I don't want to say don't ask why in a math video. But if it helps you remember the rule, it's awesome. So if we are dividing fractions, we're going to flip the second fraction. And then we're going to multiply. Okay? So for example, let's say I had, let's say we have 3/2 divided by 1/2. All right, so we want to look at that second fraction. And we are going to flip it. And when I do that, I'm going to rewrite it as multiplication. So instead of 3/2 divided by 1/2, we're going to write it as 3/2 times 2 over 1. I bet you noticed something here. This 2 and this 2, we can cancel those. So we end up with 3 times 1 is 3 over 1 times 1 is 1. Remember, any number divided by 1 is just itself. Let's try another one of these. Let's do 2/3 divided by 5/8. Remember, we're going to take that second fraction. I'm going to rewrite this problem as multiplication and flip the second fraction. So instead of 2/3 divided by 5/8, we're going to write it as 2/3 times 8/5. I don't see any common factors here, so I'm just going to multiply straight across. 2 times 8 is 16, 3 times 5 is 15, and then I'd take a look at 16 over 15, make sure they don't have any common factors. They don't, so that's going to be my answer. Another way of saying flip the second and multiply that you may hear in your class is keep, change, change, flip. And what we mean by that is if we have, let's say, 2/3 divided by 1/6. That means that we are going to keep the 2/3. We're going to change that division to a multiplication. We're going to throw a marker on the floor. Then we're going to flip that 1/6 to be 6 over 1. Okay? So just another way to approach it. Let's go ahead and finish the problem out though. 2/3 times 6 over 1. So 2 times 6 is 12. 3 times 1 is 3. So I get 12 over 3, which is just 4. And you could have reduced this 6 and 3 here if you noticed it, but if not, it works out okay anyway. One more thing I want to mention, and that is if you're dealing with a whole number. So for example, if I have 4 thirds times 6. One of them is a fraction, one of them is a whole number. We just want to rewrite that 6 as a fraction. So remember that 6 is also 6 over 1. Then we can approach it just using the rules that we have. Now, I'm going to say, well, 3 and 6 can both be divided by 3. So 4 times 2 is 8. 1 times 1 is 1. So we get 8 over 1, which is just 8.